Hello! I would like to share with you today some basic tips on a beginner's guide to email marketing because it is something that I think every small business owner should be doing, could be doing, and frankly can easily get started today. So, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Michelle. I'm love running, skiing, sustainability, anything to do with the environment, and my lovely dog Lola. I have 20 years of marketing experience that started in London and now I'm based in Germany. And I generally work only with small and ethical businesses, and apparently I like to hang around in doorways having my photograph taken. So let's talk about why I think email marketing is fantastic for a small business. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time on social media, and that is also fantastic, and I'm a big advocate of that. But in the last few years, the social media platform is incredibly crowded and is very fast moving. So one of the things I like to talk about really is kind of maintaining your audience and growing your audience. And one way to do that is to get your audience, no matter where you find them, onto an email list, because an audience is really potential future customers. I mean, when you're running a business, it's nice to have friends and it's nice to have an audience, but that audience only really matters if they become your future customers. And not all of them are going to be your future customers. That's absolutely fine. There's some maths there that suggests you need quite a lot of them in order to get one customer, but you've got to start somewhere. And I think an email list is a great way to keep those people close to you. And one thing to remember about a list is an email list belongs to you, whereas a social media platform will always belong to Facebook, for example, or Instagram or Twitter. If they shut down your account, then all of your contacts go away. So when you've got a mailing list, okay, you'll hold that list on the mailing list, but theoretically those people belong to you and you can download them, although we have to be compliant with data protection laws, but you have much more control over that. Secondly, people on that mailing list, if they've signed up to your mailing list in a consensual way, which is something that we'll talk about later, is they've given you permission to stay in contact with them. And permission marketing is really interesting and important because it's basically somebody saying, I want to hear what you have to say. Now, they may not read or listen to what you have to say all the time, but they have given you permission to regularly stay in touch. So that's like someone inviting you into their inbox on a regular basis, and that's pretty powerful stuff. The other thing that email marketing has as an advantage over social media is that you can actually be a bit more personal. I'm not talking about like revealing your personal secrets or your personal life, but you can have a more intense conversation through email. You can actually, unpackage more interesting and deeper messages with people through the medium of email marketing. It doesn't need to be a short post on Facebook that is, there and gone. You can actually really start to develop a style about your communication with your audience and just really kind of go deep with that. And I really enjoy that. What I post on social media might be a few lines, sometimes it's a bit longer, but when I sit down to actually write a newsletter or a blog post, then I find that I can really kind of get creative, have some very interesting thoughts and commentary about stuff that's relevant to my industry or my client's industry if I'm writing for them. And it's quite an interesting and creative process and something that I really enjoy, and I hope you will too. So let's talk about how you can get started, because I think it could be quite overwhelming if you've never done any kind of email marketing before. And I'm going to give you 10 super easy steps that you can basically get started with today. You don't have to do it all at once, and there's no need to do it all at once. And every one of these steps you can improve upon every time you take them. The first thing I want to suggest is that you get yourself a MailChimp account. I love MailChimp. I use several different email providers for most of my clients because I do several different newsletters for them. But MailChimp remains, for me, the best one to use, and certainly the one for beginners. It's free for a list of up to 2,000 people, and only then do you start paying. So, it's going to take you quite a while to build up to 2,000 members on your email list. So you can go for quite a long time with that before you need to start paying for it. It's ever so simple to set up. They have quite a lot of tutorials and it's quite step by step. They have some really lovely templates. So if you're not a designer, you don't know how to design newsletters in HTML, you're not great with graphics, there's some really great templates that you can use straight out of the box, so you don't need to overcomplicate the process. And generally speaking, on an ongoing basis, it's really, really easy to use. Most importantly, it is GDPR compliant. So that's the new data regulations that came into force end of June, I think, or July. I don't remember now. There was a big fuss, and it kind of has all died down, not unlike the year 2000. So it's got everything built in that you need to. It's not always perfect, and yes, sometimes it does make mistakes, but I found of all of the different email software that I have used with clients, this one to me is the simplest to get started with. That's just a little, I'll get the link for you, but it's basically mailchimp.com. It's not difficult to find. If you Google it, you'll find MailChimp, and first thing you do is sign up and just, walk your way through their process of setting up a new account. The next thing you need to do is create a process for capturing emails of people that visit your website. This is super simple inside MailChimp. You will simply create a form, then add a button to your website. A more advanced version, and something that you can either do immediately or later, it's not something you need to worry about now, is to create a pop-up on your website. And I think pop-ups are pretty standard now and aren't as off-putting as people used to find them. I certainly have a very successful rate with pop-ups for my clients' websites. So you can do that so that when someone visits your website, after a few seconds, and this is one of mine, after a few seconds a pop-up will basically come up and with a little form saying, would you like to receive my newsletter? It's quite important that for GDPR consent that you kind of confirm how often you're going to be sending it and what sort of information you'll be sending. But it's all pretty simple stuff. It's not rocket science, it's basically just common sense. So that's the second thing you need to do, and once you've done that, then you've got a method for capturing emails. And once you've got a few emails, you've got yourself a mailing list and you can get started. So the next thing I would do is to design a masthead. A masthead is the bit on the top of the newsletter that conveys your brand. You can also use it to set expectations about what's going to be in the newsletter, which is kind of nice. You may have more than one different type of masthead if you're sending more than one different type of newsletter to your mailing list, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. And these are a few examples of mastheads that some of my clients or that I receive. So the top one, the Good Life Centre, that's their standard one that we use for when we're sending either storytelling emails or selling emails, so when we're listing future workshops. And you'll see that I've actually added some links there, so it looks like a mini menu, a mini navigation, like on their newsletter, on their website. And those links all go back to the specific pages on their website. To the right hand side, Making Matters, that's actually also the Good Life Centre's masthead, and that's for a curated newsletter that we send out once a month, and I'll explain a bit more about curated newsletters shortly. But that's a different masthead because it's not about us selling, it's about us sharing things that we think will be interesting to our audience. Marketing tips and social media tricks, that's my one, and I think that very clearly sets the expectations of what you might expect in my newsletter. The other one underneath Making Matters is from Cook, which is a really nice food delivery website in the UK, and I quite like all of their newsletter styling actually. It's quite busy and fun, but it really kind of conveys their style. And the one underneath is from a business coach, Mel Robbins, that I follow. And she basically sends a 5-pointer email every Thursday. And again, she's setting some very clear expectations as to what's going to be in her newsletter with that masthead. So you can have some fun with your masthead as well. And I think it's really nice to enjoy making that. And it's also something that you could change seasonally. You could even change it every time you send a newsletter, but I think it's nice to provide a bit of consistency, so when people see it, there's a nice expectation that they know it's coming from you and they're interested in what you've got to say. The next thing you need to do inside of MailChimp is to create a welcome email. You'll need to make sure that you have something called a double opt-in clicked in MailChimp, and you'll find that in your lists, and that will be all part of the process of walking through setting up a MailChimp account. But that basically means that once someone signs up on the form on your website, they then get an email from you that says, please confirm that you want to sign into this newsletter. And that is something that you need to do to keep you GDPR compliant. Not everybody will click on that because they might decide ultimately that they don't want to, but those that do are giving you permission to contact them. So actually, it's really good. It means that people have twice had to think about if they really want to receive your newsletters, and if they've twice said yes, then I guess they really do. So that's fantastic. So then you'll create something called a welcome email, which is a really simple way to say thank you for signing up to my newsletter. Set their expectations about how often you're going to send your newsletter and what the content might include. And then you can also use it to link back to your website or any specific content that you want them to see immediately after signing up to your newsletter. Here's just an example of the one that I use for mine. The dog theme is very consistent throughout my website and my newsletter, just because I love dogs, and it kind of just conveys a bit more about me, really. If you don't love them, you're probably not going to love me. So it sets some great expectations there. It doesn't have to be complex, and you'll create an automated email that just goes straight into someone's inbox as soon as they have hit the double opt-in to your newsletter. So the next step is to start planning content for your newsletters. And there are a few different ways that you can do this. First of all, you can create your own content. So that's freshly written or created or videoed content specifically for your newsletters, which is great and exciting and a nice thing to do. You can repurpose existing content. So you can take some information from your website or from your blogs or from other social media posts that you've created and repurpose that content into your newsletter, because not everybody will have seen that content. Don't assume because it's on your website or on your Facebook page or on your Instagram account that everybody has seen that. The way that algorithms work and timelines means that not everybody is going to be shown your content. Not everybody's on the edge of their seat waiting for your content. And one of the things that I think is really, really important about having a mailing list is that anybody that has signed up for your list, I feel, deserves to be handled with a huge amount of respect and care, and really spoon-fed your content. Like, they deserve to be given that content first or in a more digestible way through the medium of your newsletter, because they have chosen to be part of your tribe. So I think that's really important. And one of the other things you can do is to curate content, which is to find content that will be interesting to your audience and share it. And I'll talk more about that in detail. It's important to start filing ideas for content as you find it. So either create some folders on your computer or use a web clipper like Evernote. So as you find things that you want to share or things that spark a little bit of creativity in you that you want to comment on or write about, just write some notes and keep them somewhere on something like Evernote. I use the free version of Evernote and it's brilliant. And then you need to kind of set aside some time, either monthly or weekly or every 2 weeks, to kind of go through all of your topics and all of the content that you've found or you want to write about, and kind of, I guess, look at the themes that you might like to include. And I think it's really important that you think about the themes that are relevant to your business, and you can find information or interesting content or commentary to write about that fits under these themes. The other thing that is a great thing to do to provide you with inspiration and ideas is to sign up to newsletters yourself and collect and keep ideas. There's no such thing as a new idea. You might get a fantastic newsletter from something that isn't in any way related to your industry, but it comes into your news box, your inbox, and you think, oh wow, I love the way they've done that, I love the way they've talked about that, and you can apply it to your business or your customers. So I do that all the time. I really, really admire well written and well presented newsletters, and I collect them and I guess repurpose them for my own benefit, really, or just use their ideas and supplement them with things that are more relevant to my business or my customers. So let's go back to creating content for your newsletters. So this is if you're developing something fresh for your audience. I think the first thing to remember is that you always need to be giving great value to your newsletter list, to people that have basically said, I want to hear from you. So don't send rubbish out for the sake of sending rubbish. Things like a tutorial or a how-to guide. So if you're a jeweler, maybe you want to send out a guide on how to pick a ring, how to clean your earrings, how to change a battery in a watch. I mean, things like this that would be very, very useful. Think about the things that people might Google about, how they might find out how to do things that they're going to do themselves anyway, won't necessarily come to you for, but that in a few words or a few minutes you could share some really valuable information to them, and I think that's something that people really, really appreciate. You can share your thoughts and comments on things that are relevant in your industry or that have happened in the news that might touch on your industry. There's obviously, people have got a lot to say about Brexit at the moment, and that might be incredibly relevant if you get staff from overseas, or if you have business overseas, or if you work overseas like me. I work in Germany, so the topic of Brexit is really, really important to me, and it's going to be very relevant to my business. So I have, quite a lot of thoughts and comments on that, and I quite like to spark conversations with my audience about that as well. Telling stories is really interesting. I'm not talking about fairy tales, of course. I'm talking about, the things that happen to us throughout our working day that might be relevant to our audience. I manage quite a lot of websites, and there is never a week that goes by without something happening. There'll be an update, a piece of software, and that might bring a website to a complete halt, and I have to drop everything and fix that, or it might just require a tiny little tweak. But things like that are quite interesting to share with certain audiences. It's not for everyone, because it kind of tells a story about how, I don't just build a website and it's done. It's a constant job to maintain it, to stay on top of it, to keep it relevant. So that's quite interesting for a certain part of my audience. You might be a fashion designer and might like to talk about what influences you, how the environment influences you, how the people that help make your products or the fabric or the designs work with you. Things like this are really interesting for people to understand. We all want to know the backstory now. It's not enough to just have a product or service. We like to know a bit more about people behind it. So it's kind of nice to get personal. And again, I'm not talking about necessarily sharing the ins and outs of your daily life or, your relationship with your partner right now. I'm just talking about, a little bit about the ups and downs of your business and your work, and how, not everything goes right for people. I think there's a real interest in this idea of like the real life behind Instagram. So rather than this perfectly polished version we see on a lot of social media, it's always quite interesting to see, what happened before it got finessed or polished, or behind the scenes stuff. Things like that are really interesting. And also, I think showcasing your team and your customers is a great way for them to A, share your content for you, and B, just kind of highlight how much you appreciate them and how you don't really work in isolation. And it's a great way to just share your appreciation of them, I think. Ultimately, when you're putting together content and creating content for your newsletters, I think always ask yourself, so what? Is this interesting? Am I writing for the sake of writing? Is what I've got to say going to be interesting to someone? It's not going to be interesting to everyone all the time, and that's perfectly fine. You can't please everyone all the time, but maybe when you're sitting down and writing content for your newsletters, you might have a particular member of your audience in mind. Maybe you're writing just for one person that day, and I think that's absolutely fine, and I get some really lovely feedback from my newsletters. Not loads, but 2 or 3 emails a week I will get back from different people on my newsletter list saying, thank you, that really spoke to me today, or that was very relevant, or that's been really helpful. And I feel like because when I write my newsletters, I'm starting to think very specifically of certain people every time I write them. Different people, but I might be thinking, oh God, I know that client or that member of my audience has a gardening business and it's quite seasonal, so I might talk about seasonality of how we work and how it feels to be working in different seasons and how that affects your mood and things like that. So yeah, just ask yourself, so what? Who is this for? Is it interesting to someone? And if it is, great, go ahead. So the next step I want to talk about is repurposing content. So this is basically about content that you've already got in one form or another, and you are going to reuse it or reshare it, or as I like to say, spoon feed it to your newsletter audience. That might be, for example, a link to a video tutorial that you've created on YouTube. Now, you can't embed a video into a MailChimp newsletter, but you can. It will create a little preview, and there's a particular content block that you can use for this. It will create a preview, so it will look like the video's in there, and then they'll click on it and it'll take them to wherever you've embedded it, so either YouTube or Facebook or on your website or something like that. But that's a nice thing to do, and you could just do a little introduction to that. You could share a blog post. That might be a link to a blog post, but I think wherever possible, if you can, unless it's a very long blog post, it's great to actually summarize an article or share the complete article in your newsletter, because again, I feel like people that have signed up for your newsletter have given you permission to contact them twice because of the double opt-in, and they really kind of deserve to be spoon-fed your content. We shouldn't necessarily be making them go to a website to click on it and read. Now, I know sometimes that is our goal, is to get more clicks and things on our website, but just remember, these people have already told you that they're part of your tribe, so let's really give them a fantastic experience, and that might mean keeping them in their inbox, which is where they've chosen to be, and not take them anywhere else to finish reading your article. So if you can, share a complete article within your newsletter. If it's longer, summarize the article and link to the longer version of it. You can also create a little mini shop within your newsletters as well. So that might be something you take if you've got products for sale on your website or you're selling events, then you can create a little mini shop within the newsletter so that they could shop within it, and then that will ultimately take them to your website to finish the purchase. But again, that's just repurposing existing content. You're just going to spend a little bit of time thinking about how you present it within that newsletter. This is just an example of how I have actually shared a blog post that I've written. It's actually a summary of a much longer blog, but I tried to make sure that a lot of the key information about why I thought that creating a podcast was a good idea for small businesses, and then if somebody was interested in that, at the bottom I have summarised where they can go to read the rest of the article to find out how to create their own podcast themselves. So the key information of why I think it's a good idea and also some disadvantages is there. And then if they are really interested, because it's not going to be for everybody, then there's a link to the full article, so it's not quite so long in the newsletter. And that's quite a good way of, keeping quite a lot of information in the newsletter, but also linking back to your website too. So the next thing is to curate content for a newsletter. And I think this is probably the most fun, because you can really start to think about what interests your audience and what your values are for your business. And then you can start to go ahead and find topics and content and relevant information based on all of these values and curate them, bring them all together in a newsletter and share this relevant content with your audience. The main advantage of this is it's pretty easy to do. You're probably doing it anyway, because if you're kind of embedded in your industry and you have a certain set of values, so for me, I'm very interested in sustainability and the environment. So I already read and share a lot of information on other providers that are relevant in this way. I read a lot of articles on things we can do to reduce our impact on the planet. And so this is already within, I guess, part of my daily routine anyway, is that I'm looking at this information. So all I then need to do is kind of think, well, how does that align with my business? Well, my business is that I work with ethical and sustainable businesses anyway. So this is all going to be interesting and relevant to my audience. So then I can just start to collect this content ready to reuse in a curated newsletter. It positions you as a valuable source of this information, and it kind of, I guess, puts you as a central hub. So people start to think of you as the go-to person on those particular topics. And that's really, really valuable and good for your business. It's also really simple. Like I said, you're probably doing it automatically anyway. We're just taking what you're doing naturally and formalizing it so that you have this amazing collection of content that you can share with your audience. The one thing I do want to be clear about, though, is that sharing, no matter what anybody says, sharing and retweeting, unless you've got a very specific comment that is contradictory to what you're sharing, is endorsement. So don't just share content that you haven't read and understood and that you feel aligned with the source of that information, because you are essentially putting yourself on the same platform as whatever it is you're sharing. So this is just an example of my curated newsletter. I send this one out once a month. I include a roundup of the blog posts that I've created on my website, because it's perfectly fine to share your own content and curate that too. And then I share some other things that I find interesting, perhaps some things to do, some books to read. And I also, you can't see it on here, but I have a little nonsense section of stuff which I just think is fun. And I really enjoy creating this newsletter because it also gives me a little bit more flexibility to share and comment on things that might be just outside of the immediate circle of my business, but that is relevant to me and aligns with my values. The next step is to create yourself a publishing schedule. And the most important thing is to be realistic. There is no point in saying you're going to publish a newsletter every week if that is going to kill you. Better to do it monthly and be reliable and consistent so people know what to expect. I publish my newsletter weekly, either on a Thursday night or a Friday morning, and I am pretty consistent with that, except when I'm on holiday. And maybe people don't care, but you will care, and it's a good discipline, and there will be certain small group of people within your newsletter that are going to start to rely on what you're producing. So it's really important to be somebody that they can rely on. So start monthly first, or even quarterly if you can't even commit to monthly. But I think monthly is a great discipline to have. The final step, and possibly the most important because it's kind of the point of everything, is to use your newsletter to sell. And you can do this unashamedly. Not every newsletter that you send out should be a selling newsletter. You should be giving value, sharing amazing content, aligning yourself with the values and the commentary that is relevant to your industry, telling stories, introducing, your partners, your team members, your customers, and things like that. But ultimately, your audience is there and has given you permission to sell to them. So when you do that, you can be quite unashamedly selling when you do. I wouldn't recommend doing it every week, for example. I think you should give a lot of value before you ask for a sale. And when I talk about this on social media, I basically say, 75% of what you're selling, of what you're providing, should be giving great value, and the other 25% can be asking for a sale. But when you do, and this comes back to maybe you might have different newsletters that do different jobs, you can be quite bold about it. So, for example, these are a couple of examples of selling newsletters that I produce for my clients. These are very specifically newsletters that are all about getting people to buy their courses and events. And these go out at least once a month. But the other newsletters that we produce are informative storytelling, sharing information, how-to guides, and also curated newsletters as well. So I guess 1 in 4 of these newsletters is a selling newsletter. But when we do, we're very clear. This newsletter is about trying to get bums on seats or sales through our shop. And we're not ashamed about that because we give great value the rest of the time. If you don't ever sell to your newsletter list, you're kind of training them to not expect you to sell to them, so that if you do, once a month or very occasionally ask for a sell, they're going to be a bit horrified. So I think it's quite important that you factor this in to your newsletter scheduling right from the beginning. The final point I want to make is to just do it. Just have a go. Just get started. Waiting for the right time is never going to happen. Waiting for it to be perfect is never going to happen. I probably every week send my newsletter out with a typo in it, or it's usually a blooming autocorrect on my on MailChimp, or when I'm typing things out, will make some stupid error on it. And you can't catch all of these errors, and of course you want to proofread it, you want to make it as good as possible, but ultimately if you wait for it to be perfect, you're just never going to send it, and the procrastination is just going to kill your business. You've just got to learn that good is better than perfect, and done is the best element of all. You've just got to get it out there, start doing it, start making it a great habit, and perfect it as you go. Just see what works for you, see how you can make this part of your regular marketing plan and sales plan for your business. Have a crack at it, see what sort of feedback you get, and just, slightly amend it every time you do it to make it a little bit better. If you would like to hear more from me and find out more information about marketing tips and social media tricks, then you can, of course, sign up to my newsletter, which you will find on my website, which is myoutsourcedmarketingteam.com, or this neat little shortened version I have here, myomt.uk, and you will find a link to my newsletter or a little pop-up that will encourage you. And I send information and valuable how-to guides and commentary and a curated newsletter every week. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much. I hope you found that helpful.